There are paintings that not only tell history but revive it with such emotional force that time seems to stop before them. The Execution of Lady Jane Grey, painted in 1833 by the French artist Paul Delaroche, belongs to that category of works that transcend the canvas to become a moral, almost spiritual experience. It is one of the most moving paintings of the 19th century, a silent tragedy in which innocence, power, and death confront one another in a scene so perfect that it hurts to look at. It is not just a historical painting, it is a visual elegy about the fragility of human beings before the designs of power, a work that made Delaroche one of the great masters of pictorial drama. The story that inspired this painting is real and deeply tragic. Lady Jane Grey, known as the Queen of the 9 Days, was a young English noblewoman who, through political and religious intrigues, was proclaimed queen in 1553 after the death of Edward VI, the young son of Henry VIII. But her reign lasted only a few days. Mary Tudor, the legitimate daughter of Henry and Catherine of Aragon, claimed the throne with popular support. Jane, barely a 17-year-old adolescent, was arrested, accused of treason, and imprisoned in the Tower of London. In February of 1554, she was publicly executed. Her story, a mixture of purity, imposed ambition, and sacrifice, became a symbol of innocence destroyed by power. Paul Delaroche, born in Paris in 1797, was a painter trained in the French academic tradition. A lover of detail, theatrical drama, and historical rigor, he devoted much of his career to representing tragic episodes of the past, seeking not only to narrate facts, but to awaken empathy and reflection in the viewer. In The Execution of Lady Jane Grey, Delaroche achieved his most perfect work. He conceived it with scenic precision, as a theatrical tableau frozen just before the climax. The scene does not show the moment of death, but the instant before, the absolute silence that precedes the fall of the executioner's axe. The painting shows Jane Grey dressed in white, a symbol of purity and innocence. Her gown shines under a light that falls like a divine revelation amid the darkness. Her eyes are blindfolded, she kneels, and her hands reach out, groping for the execution block. Beside her, the executioner waits with an expression of respect and sorrow, holding the axe with its edge downward, while an assistant gently guides the young woman toward her fate. Behind them, two ladies in waiting collapse in despair. One covers her face to avoid seeing, the other throws herself to the ground in tears. The setting is closed, gloomy, almost claustrophobic, a stage enclosing tragedy with unbearable solemnity. Every element of the composition is charged with symbolism. The light entering from above and bathing Jane represents the purity of the innocent soul. The whiteness of her dress contrasts with the dark tones of the room, dominated by brown and black stone, as if death and power were shrouded in shadow, while the victim radiates light. The execution block, polished and simple, looks like an altar. In fact, the scene can be read as a Christian transfiguration. Jane does not die as a criminal but as a martyr. Her serenity, her blind surrender, evoke faith, innocence, and sacrifice. Delaroche was a master of contained emotion. There is no blood or explicit violence. Everything lies in psychological tension. The viewer feels the weight of silence, the absent sound of the axe that has not yet fallen. In his painting, history becomes universal tragedy. Jane Grey is not merely a figure of the 16th century. She is the embodiment of every innocent victim sacrificed for political or religious interests. That is why the painting has moved entire generations. In her, everyone can see the reflection of human fragility before the machinery of power. The work was presented at the Paris Salon in 1834 and caused an immediate commotion. Crowds gathered to see it, some wept before the canvas. Critics hailed it as one of the pinnacles of historical art. It was a time when France, after the Revolution and the Napoleonic Empire, was reflecting on the relationship between power and justice, and the story of Jane Grey resonated as a moral warning. Delaroche had achieved what few artists manage, to turn a distant episode into a mirror of the human condition. But the painting also stirred controversy. Some conservative critics considered its drama excessive, almost theatrical. Others reproached the artist for turning an execution into a scene of beauty. Yet that contrast, the beauty amid tragedy, was precisely what Delaroche sought: the tension between the sublime and the horrific, between innocence and fate. With that ambiguity, the work marked the height of Romantic historical painting. The material history of the painting also carries its own drama. During the Second World War, the execution of Lady Jane Grey was thought to have been destroyed. The bombing of London in 1941 devastated much of the National Gallery's collection, and it was believed the canvas had been reduced to ashes. For more than 20 years, it was thought lost forever. However, in 1973, while restoration and cataloging work was underway in the museum's storage, the painting was rediscovered, rolled and protected, miraculously intact. That discovery was received as a resurrection, a painting about innocence and death that had survived destruction. After its recovery, the work underwent careful cleaning and restoration. Yellowed varnishes that darkened the original tones were removed, returning Jane's dress to its radiant white and restoring the supernatural light that dominates the scene. Restorers confirmed that Delaroche had used thin layers of pigment with transparent varnishes to achieve that inner luminosity, a technique inherited from the Renaissance. The result is a painting that seems to emit its own light, as if Jane's soul still illuminated the space. The symbolic meaning of the painting has changed over time. In the 19th century, it was read as a moral warning about the excesses of power and political violence. In the 20th, it was interpreted as a reflection on the female condition, Jane as victim of patriarchy, a young woman sacrificed by decisions made by men, her father, her father-in-law, her advisors, who used her as a pawn in a political game. Today, in the 21st century, the work is also seen as a meditation on innocence in the face of fanaticism, a question of how purity and compassion survive in a world governed by ambition. There is in the execution of Lady Jane Grey a direct relationship between history and theater. Delaroche studied in detail the records of the era, the uniforms, the architecture of the Tower of London, but composed the scene as a stage director. The placement of the figures, the lateral lighting, the distance between executioner and victim, the emotion of the ladies, all is calculated to produce maximum dramatic effect. Yet nothing feels artificial. The balance between historical truth and emotional intensity is perfect. Possible hidden symbols have also been discussed. Jane's white dress, besides purity, can be seen as a shroud. The bandage covering her eyes is a double symbol. It represents blindness imposed by power and at the same time, the faith that trusts without seeing. The block, reminiscent of an altar, transforms the act of execution into a ritual of sacrifice, while the light falling upon her hints at transcendent salvation. Even the executioner, with his expression of sorrow, seems to participate in the spiritual drama. He is not a monster, but a man compelled to fulfill destiny. Delaroche knew how to move without excess. In Jane's posture, the bowed neck, the hands searching for the block, there is superhuman dignity. It is the acceptance of fate without hatred, without rebellion. That serenity turns tragedy into moral act, and that is why the painting has something sacred. Looking at it is like witnessing an ancient sacrifice where beauty and death embrace. For almost 2 centuries, the painting has moved millions of visitors at the National Gallery in London. Many approach expecting a historical painting and find an emotional revelation. The light, the silence, the purity of the scene produce an effect beyond intellect. It is pure empathy. The viewer does not see Jane die. They feel her destiny. And that is Delaroche's greatest achievement, transforming history into compassion. The work also deeply influenced other artists. His way of theatricalizing history inspired the English pre-Raphaelites, who adopted his symbolic light and interest in innocent martyrs. Even 20th century filmmakers such as Carl Dreyer or Ingmar Bergman recognized in it a source of inspiration for their treatment of faith and sacrifice. The execution of Lady Jane Grey remains, nearly 2 centuries after its creation, one of the most painful and perfect images of Romanticism. Delaroche achieved what few artists do, uniting beauty and tragedy, historical rigor and human emotion. To gaze upon it is to remember that history is made not only of battles and kings, but of innocent souls caught in the gears of power. Jane Grey, the Queen of 9 Days, found in painting the eternity denied to her in life. Her death became light, and that light, still shining on the canvas, continues to question the world about its own blindness. To contemplate the execution of Lady Jane Grey is to look upon a wound that does not close, an instant in which the soul and the body are suspended between life and eternity. In that cold, silent room Paul Delaroche imagined within the Tower of London, time does not pass, it freezes at the exact moment when innocence touches the edge of death. No other painting of the 19th century managed to unite with such intensity historical accuracy, theatrical drama, and moral depth. It is as if every stroke had been conceived not to narrate but to make one feel, not to record but to confess. Delaroche understood that the power of art does not lie in showing violence, but in making visible the dignity of suffering. If one observes the painting closely, every element seems to have a voice. The whiteness of Jane's dress speaks of purity, but also of vulnerability. It is a white that does not shine like marble, but trembles like fabric dampened by tears. The bandage covering her eyes is the most heartbreaking metaphor of human destiny. The young woman does not see the end approaching, but she advances toward it with serenity. It is blind faith, ultimate trust in divine mercy, the surrender of all will. That bandage, which in the real story probably never existed, was added by Delaroche to transform the act of execution into an act of transcendence. In the darkness of her blindness, Jane becomes light. The wooden block on which she will rest her head is placed like an altar. The executioner, with his powerful build and restrained gesture, bends with a mixture of respect and horror. There is no cruelty in him, only duty. He is an instrument of a system that devours what it cannot control. His figure, wrapped in shadow, represents the dark side of authority, the blind obedience that perpetuates power. Beside him, the assistant who gently guides Jane, with almost tenderness, is the only human link in the ceremony of death. His outstretched hand embodies compassion that survives even within the machinery of execution. The background of the painting is submerged in shadows. There are no spectators, no crowd. Delaroche removes the presence of the historical public and transforms the execution into an intimate, private, spiritual scene. That narrative decision completely changes the meaning of the painting. It is no longer a political act but an inner passion. Instead of representing power, punishing treason, he shows the soul confronting the unknown. The tragedy becomes universal. The light falling from above, cold, almost supernatural, bathes Jane and separates her from the rest of the world. In that light, the artist concentrates the moral meaning of his work. It is the radiance of innocent conscience that illuminates even the darkest place. Delaroche's composition does not seek pure realism, but emotional truth. The balance between the theatrical and the spiritual is exact. Everything that could distract has been removed. No blood, no cries, no audience, only silence. A silence so deep that the viewer can almost hear the rustle of Jane's dress as she kneels. That economy of means is what makes the painting so powerful. Every detail, from the texture of the stone to the softness of the young woman's hair, serves the moment when the human soul is tested in its utmost fragility. When Delaroche presented the work, France was living through its own tension between power, revolution, and faith. The painting was understood as a moral warning. The story of a teenage queen killed by fanaticism resonated in a country that had executed its own monarchy half a century earlier. In that context, the execution of Lady Jane Grey was not merely an English scene but an allegory of innocence sacrificed in the name of politics. The public of the Paris Salon felt it that way, as a universal tragedy. Visitors kept silent before the canvas, as if in a chapel. Delaroche had achieved what every artist seeks and few attain: to turn art into spiritual experience. But what differentiates this work from other historical paintings is the way it humanizes power and elevates the victim. Delaroche paints neither heroes nor villains. There are no visible culprits, only human beings trapped in the machinery of history. The executioner seems to suffer. The ladies cry in despair, the assistant trembles, and Jane, the only one who should be afraid, remains calm. That emotional inversion creates a tragic balance. The viewer does not feel hatred but compassion. That compassion is the true subject of the painting. From a psychological point of view, the painting can be interpreted as a meditation on the loss of innocence. Jane, barely a child, is victim of her surroundings' ambitions. She was used as a political pawn by her family and by Protestant reformers who saw in her a tool to prevent Mary Tudor's rise. Delaroche, by depicting her in white, not only makes her a symbol of purity, but also a mirror of a society that sacrifices its innocence for power. In her serenity, there is something of redemption, a moral victory that transcends horror. On a technical level, Delaroche demonstrates absolute mastery of color and composition. His palette, though restrained, is subtle and expressive. The earthy and gray tones of the background contrast with the pearly white of the dress, creating a focus of light that commands all attention. The texture of the fabric, the faint sheen of the silk, the reflections of the axe and the tears on skin are treated with almost tactile precision. Yet there is no coldness in his technique. Every brushstroke vibrates with contained emotion. Delaroche was an academic painter, but his romantic sensitivity allowed him to infuse his works with psychological depth that transcends academic rigidity. The restoration of the painting after its supposed destruction during the war added a symbolic chapter to its story. That a painting about destroyed innocence survived the bombings of London seems like a message from destiny itself. The experts who recovered it in the 70s spoke of the almost mystical impression of unrolling the canvas and seeing, amid dust, Jane's serene face appear. Cleaning restored its original luminosity and revealed details that had remained hidden: the tremor of hands, barely visible tears, the moist gleam of wood. It was like giving life back to a martyr who refused to disappear. The influence of the execution of Lady Jane Grey extended beyond painting. It inspired writers, poets, and composers. The narrative power of the scene made it a model for Romantic English and French literature. In Victorian times, reproductions of the painting adorned salons and were taught in schools as examples of virtue and sacrifice. But darker interpretations also emerged. Some saw in it a morbid fascination with female death, an echo of the romantic ideal of woman as victim. Over time, the debate changed. Today, many art historians read the work through a feminist lens, as a denunciation of the destiny imposed on women in a society ruled by male ambition. Jane Grey, in this reading, is not a passive victim, but a tragic heroine who faces her fate with courage the men around her lacked. On the symbolic plane, the painting can be read as a confrontation between light and darkness, not only visual but moral. Light represents conscience, truth, innocence, shadow, power, injustice, death. But Delaroche does not paint a triumph of darkness. He paints the moment when light remains alive even within shadow. Thus, the painting is not hopeless. On the contrary, there is in it a serene beauty that consoles. The light surrounding Jane does not fade with her death. It seems to announce her transcendence. The emotional impact of the work lies in its ability to turn horror into silence, violence into tenderness, tragedy into reflection. Delaroche makes the viewer not only look but meditate. What does it mean to die with dignity? What value does innocence have in a world ruled by politics? Can purity survive the corruption of power? These are the questions the painting still poses, and in doing so it remains modern, because it speaks of issues that have never ceased to exist. Every time one stands before the canvas at the National Gallery, the scene seems to be reborn. The light still falls upon the white dress, the ladies still tremble, the executioner still waits. Everything happens again and again, as if the painting were an eternal theater where history repeats its lesson, and the viewer, unable to avoid it, becomes a witness to an uncomfortable truth. Civilization advances, but injustice repeats itself under new names. In that sense, the execution of Lady Jane Grey transcends its time and theme. It is a meditation on the human condition, a warning against moral blindness, a reminder that beauty can emerge even from the deepest pain. Delaroche turned tragedy into a prayer, death into a symbol of compassion, history into a mirror of the soul. That is why, almost 2 centuries later, his painting still moves us, because in the blindfolded face of Jane Grey, we all recognize the fragility and strength of the human spirit facing its destiny.